Hey, so it's been a few days since I've uploaded videos. I've had a big technical problem on my computer, a virus, so I've had to be absent for a few days, being the PC world. Real nuisance, but that's life. Anyway, the problem seems to be resolved now, so hopefully this will be more consistent. Um, I want to speak a little bit about the US election. Now, as I say about most of the videos when I'm talking about another country, I always emphasize I am an outsider. If I was an American citizen, if I was on the ground, would I have a different perspective? Possibly. I don't think it would be radically different, but perhaps a little bit different. But I can't imagine it would radically change my centrist views, whether I was an American citizen or not. Um, I always find the American elections very interesting. Overall, I find them more interesting than our elections. I think it's because there's more of a carnival atmosphere. I'm not saying there isn't important issues, of course there are, but there's something that comes across almost like a carnival about the US election, and I like that. I think it's good for politics. I think it can engage people in a way that our elections don't. The American process is very long, of course. The whole process is about 2 years compared to the UK, which is at the most a few months. Um, Obviously, we're a monarchy. The US is a presidential system, so some differences there. But even other republics like France and so on don't have such a long election process. Um, I think that America, like most democracies, is a flawed democracy. There's certainly many, many, many things that need to be fixed. I think that big money is far too much a deciding factor in how well a candidate does. Um, and that's something that puts me off. I also think that probably the average American citizen gets tired of attack ads, which is why citizens tend to respond more to positive candidates. This isn't universal, of course, because if you have a candidate who's perceived as weak and they're not on the offensive, then that could be a downfall. Um, American media networks are a bit like the British tabloids, very powerful. So I was watching Primary Colours last night with John Travolta, and I think it's a pretty realistic snapshot of what the American process is like. If you've seen that film, it's a sort of vague reference, not a vague reference, actually quite a unsubtle reference to the Clinton campaign. Governor Jack Stanton very much has the attributes of Bill Clinton, but the campaign in the film pretty much demonstrates, I think, what the American election cycle is like. It's a good film if you haven't seen it. Um, Obviously, it is just a film. I'm not saying it's exactly like real life, but there's definitely parallels. Another good one is Running Mates with Tom Selleck. Swing Vote with Kevin Costner. They're all good films. Anyway, without blabbering on too much about all ins and outs of it, I want to speak about each of the candidates, these leading candidates. I'll just say off the top, and this is as an outsider, my favourite candidate, Martin O'Malley of Meriden, is out. So that's a bit disappointing for me. Um, I am more pro Democrat than Republican overall. That doesn't mean that I'm slavishly pro Democrat, and it doesn't mean that I'm 100% against the Republicans, but it's simply because here in the UK I'm more aligned to centrist parties. The Republicans are broadly the equivalent of the British Conservative Party, the Democrats broadly the equivalent of British Labour. It's of course these are much bigger parties and a lot more internally diverse, especially the Democrats. I mean, you have Liberal Democrats, you have Conservative Democrats, and so on. I think that the whole paradigm of American politics is different from Europe in general because what is considered to be left wing in America would very much be centrist in Europe. So, for example, if Tony Blair was running in America, he'd be seen as a probably quite a lefty. But by British standards, he's very much to the centre right, at least within his own party. Um, and again, the word socialist is dirty in America. So, anyway, I'm going to just, without blabbering on, I'm going to talk a bit about each of the candidates. Hillary Clinton. Well, there is some attention to her age. She'll be 69. I honestly think one thing this election has showed is that age is not a barrier because if someone's running a presidential campaign, whether they win or not, the very fact that they're willing to get into the extremely energetic cycle that it involves is telling in itself. This is a race where a lot of the candidates are older candidates. Hillary 69, Trump 69, Sanders is 74. Cruz and Rubio are pretty young in their early 40s. So, but I think the average age, most of the Republican candidates are sort of mid 50s. So it's a slightly older race this time round. I really don't think that 69 is that old in politics. Um, and when you consider that ex-presidents like Jimmy Carter and George Bush Sr. are well into their 90s now, a candidate who's 69 could go 8 years, leave the White House at 77. I think it's still relatively young, and I think that's a good thing that people aren't being discriminated against simply because they're older. Now, Hillary Clinton obviously comes from an establishment political dynasty, and she can't escape from that. She's, I think, a very formidable figure. I think she's a very, very capable politician. I think it would be a mistake if she gets into a feminist rhetoric with this campaign. So far, she hasn't done that too much, though I was disappointed when she attacked Sanders over sexism, which I thought was baseless. I think she would polarize male voters if she does that, so I think it would be a mistake. And her advisors, I hope they're not telling her that because it would be a mistake. I appreciate that Hillary Clinton's a very controversial figure, especially among the Republicans, for her role in Benghazi. This is just from an outside perspective, but I think there is a lot of focus on what happened at Benghazi, but the Republicans seem to forget that under the Bush presidency, American consulates and embassies were attacked very often, and there were deaths, but there wasn't the same level of scrutiny. So I think that's a bit unfair to focus so much on Hillary Clinton and not have the same level of scrutiny against Condoleezza Rice or was it Colin Powell, the first secretary? I forget. Anyway, under Bush. So it's quite clear that the Republicans despise Clinton and they're going to go out of their way to try and demonize her no matter what. I think if she does make it to November, then she's a real chance of winning. Um, the problem is if your name is Clinton or your name is Bush, you've got an uphill struggle because you're going to be damned if you do and damned if you don't. On one hand, even if you're considered a formidable politician, as I think Hillary is, she's always going to have that thing about your establishment. So it doesn't matter how much she speaks about the minimum wage and progressive issues. And I don't like that term progressive. I think it's condescending insofar as it alludes to this notion that only if you have certain opinions are you progressive. Who gets to define what progressive is? Um, I think the Democrats are going more to the progressive faction as opposed to moderate. I'd be a lot more centrist, therefore moderate. That's why I liked O'Malley. I think he was more on the centrist wing of the party. Probably more, I mean, probably is more to the left by American standards, but certainly not as to the left I would have thought as Sanders. So um, I think Clinton, people had always assumed she was heir apparent to Obama, but we'll see what happens. It's incredible what's happened with Bernie Sanders, and it is very comparable, I think, to Jeremy Corbyn in Britain. That's not to say that they're twins, and it's important that I think we need to recognise that they're not exactly alike, Sanders and Corbyn. Sanders, for example, his stance on Israel would be different to Corbyn's. However, they're both older men. Sanders is 74, Corbyn 66. They both have enormous support among young people. They've both unquestionably energised the political process. There is one thing I like about Sanders, and I'm saying this as a centrist. I like the fact that he is willing to speak out against the establishment. What I mean by that is he is willing to take on the banks. He is willing to say controversial things. And I think to describe yourself as a democratic socialist in America is something. I really wish Fox News wouldn't distort that because a democratic socialist is not a communist. And the way Fox News presents it is a joke. And I'm not. I don't align myself with Sanders' policies. I'm much more to the centre. But to kind of caricature him as this, Fox makes himself out to be a real joke sometimes, especially when they claim to be fair and balanced, and then they have these smug remarks about. The thing about Sanders, again, like Jeremy Corbyn, he comes across, leaving politics aside, he comes across as a likable man. He tries to play a clean campaign. He's decent. He doesn't trash talk. he's head and shoulders above Donald Trump when it comes to sheer human decency. I think, regardless, even if you don't like his policies, I don't think anyone can take that away from him. He's hard to personally dislike. Um, Speaking personally, I cannot see Sanders being president. I can see him getting very close. I can see him energizing this campaign. I just can't see as President Sanders. And I don't like saying that because it sounds shallow. It sounds like I'm judging a book by its cover. But it's not just the age factor. I think he's actually a youthful 74-year-old. It's more that I have concerns. Would a President Sanders stand up to Putin? Would a President Sanders stand up to Xi? If I was an American citizen, I'd be concerned about these things. Um, and it's very, very important. Now, Clinton, this is where I am more sympathetic to Clinton. I think she has a more realistic platform. Sanders promises a lot, but you have to pay for these things. I think Clinton has a more realistic platform, and she's a lot more experienced. I don't mean necessarily as a politician, but I mean it's all very well talking about rebelling against Washington and being outsiders, and that is the thing to do. Every candidate does it. But in the end of the day, you also need to know what you're doing in the White House. I honestly believe that Clinton would be a strong president. I'm not saying I would agree with all her policies, and I'm not describing myself as a supporter of Hillary Clinton here. There's areas to be wary of policies on. But I do think I see her more as a commander in chief than Sanders. Now, moving to the Republicans. Um, Trump is an absolute, you know, I think even right wingers are embarrassed by this guy. And the scary thing is the fact he is energizing so many people. I think he's a demagogue. I think he's dangerous. I think the sort of things the guy is saying is just unacceptable for someone who wants to assume the world's most powerful position. This man is dangerous. And if he doesn't mean that stuff, if he's saying it to get elected, well, that says he's insincere. So either way, it's a problem. I sincerely hope the Republicans don't nominate Trump. I know those Democrats want them to because they think that'll be easy to defeat. I don't think so. I think Trump is a formidable candidate. I think he's a fighter. I can't stand the man, but I think he's a fighter, and I think if he's on the ticket, he will have a real chance of winning. And it'll be like Barry Goldwater or George Wallace or another demagogue. This man is dangerous, and you don't have to be a lefty to see that. Um, Ted Cruz, again, to me, he's pretty extreme right wing. I don't think he's moderate at all. I don't think he's reasonable. I think, again, he'll polarize a lot of people. If I was a Republican, I would want Marco Rubio. I quite like Rubio, actually, from what I've seen so far. I don't particularly agree with his policies. I'd have strong differences of view on the gun issue and so on. And like I say, I'm more pro Democrat. But among the Republicans, I quite like Rubio. I think he's presidential. I think he's a reasonable man. I don't think he's an extremist. I quite like the guy as Republicans go, and I don't particularly like the Republican Party. But if I was a Republican, I'd probably choose Cruz. Sorry, Rubio. Rubio. Um, he is pretty young. He's got very boyish looks, and he's only 43, 44, I guess, election time. But he has demonstrated. I think he has demonstrated leadership qualities. Um, the problem with the primary season is there's going to be a lot of attack ads, a lot of sniping. As for others like Carson I think is kind of like a quiet Trump. I think he's also quite extreme in some of his views, but he's more quiet about it. Bush comes across as okay, actually. I think again he comes across quite reasonable, but there's a name problem there. I just don't think Americans want to see another Bush in the White House. Carly Fiorina, I don't know that much about, except that I'm using her computer. She's the CEO of Hewlett Packard. I don't know a great deal about her positions. Other Republican candidates, Santorum obviously has run a few times, but he's just dropped out. Kasich, I can see Kasich being on a VP ticket if he doesn't get the nomination, which looks, I don't think he will. I could definitely see him on a VP ticket. If anyone's kind of getting angry here and say, "Oh, what's this Brit doing talking about a process?" I emphasize, I am an outsider. I'm not telling anyone how to vote. It's the American system. It's up to Americans, etc., etc. But America is the world's most powerful country, so of course outsiders are going to be interested. Who is the commander in chief? Um, what else can I say? If I were to predict what's going to happen, I'm not going to predict the outcome of the general election, of the presidential election, because I think this year it's going to be very close. But the Democrats do have history against them insofar as it's been a long time since a Democrat has succeeded in another Democrat, unless I'm mistaken. Last time was Johnson, and that was coming in exceptional circumstances. Lyndon Johnson, Jimmy Carter had that isolated period in the late 70s. The Gore Bush thing is still very controversial. Um, Whereas there has been examples of Republicans succeeding other Republicans, Bush succeeding Reagan, Ford succeeding Nixon, and so on. Although Ford lost the general election. If I had to predict what's going to happen at this stage, I think Sanders will really give Clinton a run for her money. I think Sanders is running a similar campaign to Obama in terms of the grassroots support. That could get him very far. I think if Sanders is on the ticket, the Democrats will lose. And I don't like saying that because I like Sanders as a man. I don't particularly agree with all his policies, but I like the guy. I think, though, if the Democrats choose him, it would be like the Republicans choosing Trump. It's kind of an own goal. I think both parties are going to end up choosing more moderate figures. If that's the right term, I think the Democrats will end up with Clinton. Um, Clinton Sanders. Sanders as a running mate wouldn't be inconceivable. I mean, Obama reached out and made Clinton his Secretary of State, so it's not inconceivable. But I think more likely would be Clinton O'Malley. At this stage, I can see something like Rubio Kasich. You couldn't have two Hispanics, so it would never be a Cruz Rubio ticket because for obvious reasons. So I could see something like Rubio Kasich or even Rubio Bush. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. The intention of this video is not to offend anyone. It's not to provoke anything. Simply sharing my thoughts. If you think I'm full of shit, fine. All I ask is you keep it civil. I believe I've kept it civil, and I think everything I've said is verifiable. So that's that. Be interesting to see what happens. I'll make more videos as time goes on.